In January of 1945, deep in the frozen forests of eastern France, a single American soldier climbed onto a burning tank destroyer. The vehicle was already abandoned. Its crew was dead or wounded. Enemy machine guns were closing in, and yet this one soldier didn't retreat. Instead, he stood tall in the wreckage, grabbed a mounted 50 caliber machine gun, and began firing, alone, at an advancing German infantry force nearly 10 times his size. For almost an hour, he held them off by himself. That soldier was Audie Murphy, the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. But before he became a legend, before the medals, before the burning tank, he was just a poor, underfed Texas kid who was too small to join the army. Audie Leon Murphy was born June 20, 1925 in Kingston, Texas. He grew up in a world of dust, hunger, and hard labor. The Murphy family was desperately poor. Audie was one of 12 children living on a sharecropped land during the Great Depression. Food was scarce, shoes were a luxury, school came second to survival. By the age of 8, Audie was already hunting small game to keep his family fed. By 10, he was an expert marksman, not out of sport, but necessity. When Audie was still a teenager, his father abandoned the family. Shortly after, his mother died. At 16 years old, Audie Murphy was effectively on his own. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Audie knew exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to fight, but there was a problem. He was underage, underweight, and under height. At just 5 feet 5 inches and barely 110 pounds, he looked more like a boy than a soldier. The US Army rejected him. So did the Navy. The Marines turned him away too. Most teenagers would have given up. Audie didn't. He convinced his older sister to forge documents, changing his birth year so he appeared old enough to enlist. In 1942, the Army finally accepted him. Basic training didn't transform Audie into a giant. He was still smaller than most recruits, still underestimated, still dismissed. But there was something inside him that others didn't have: focus. While other soldiers struggled with marksmanship, Audie excelled. Every shot was precise, every movement deliberate. Drill instructors noticed. Audie didn't talk much, he didn't joke much, but when it came time to shoot, he never missed. Behind that calm exterior was something darker, a quiet anger shaped by poverty, loss, and abandonment. War didn't scare him, it gave him purpose. In 1943, Murphy was assigned to the 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. His first taste of combat came during the Allied invasion of Sicily. The battlefield was chaotic, confused landings, poor coordination, and sudden enemy ambushes. Murphy adapted instantly. During one patrol, his unit was ambushed by Italian and German forces. When his squad leader was killed, Murphy took control, despite being one of the youngest men present. He advanced alone, flanking enemy positions, killing several soldiers, and forcing the rest to retreat. It was the first sign of what was to come. As the campaign moved into mainland Italy, the fighting grew brutal. Mountain warfare, minefields, and relentless artillery. Murphy repeatedly volunteered for dangerous patrols, not because he was ordered to, but because others might not come back. During one engagement, German machine guns pinned down his location. Murphy crawled forward under fire, silenced the position with grenades, and killed the remaining crew with rifle fire. For his actions, he was promoted to corporal, soon after sergeant. He was barely old enough to shave. Combat was taking its toll. Audie watched his friend die, the very same men he trained with, joked with, and trusted with his life. Each loss hardened him. He began sleeping less, eating less, talking even less. When fighting began, something inside him switched on. He became relentless. By late 1944, Murphy had already earned a Silver Star, a Bronze Star, and a Purple Heart, and the war was far from over. France still awaited. By the winter of 1944, the Allies believed Germany was collapsing. They were wrong. What awaited Audie Murphy in France would push him past his every limit, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And soon after, he would face the moment that would make him famous. By late 1944, Allied newspapers were already celebrating victory. Paris had fallen, Germany was retreating, many believed the war in Europe was almost over. For men on the front lines, that belief was dangerously wrong. Audie Murphy and the 3rd Infantry Division arrived in eastern France as winter tightened its grip. Snow choked the forests, mud froze solid. Visibility was limited to a few dozen yards at best. There was no victory parade. This was close range killing, in terrain perfectly suited for ambush. The Germans knew it too. Murphy's regiment was tasked with clearing a series of small villages and wooded ridges, positions the Germans refused to give up. Enemy troops were no longer retreating, they were digging in. German machine gun nests were hidden in the tree lines. Mortars rained down without warning. Snipers waited patiently for a single mistake. Murphy thrived in this environment, not because it was easier, but because it rewarded speed, aggression, and instinct. During one patrol, Murphy's unit walked straight into an ambush. The first burst of machine gun fire cut down 2 soldiers instantly. Most men froze. Murphy didn't. He sprinted forward under fire, dove into a small crater, and began returning fire with calm precision, pinning the enemy long enough for his unit to regroup. He did something no one expected. He advanced alone. Crawling through snow and mud, Murphy closed the distance, lobbed grenades into the enemy position, and finished the survivors at point-blank range. The ambush collapsed, the patrol survived. By now, Murphy wasn't brave. He was becoming something more dangerous. Predictable to his men, unpredictable to the enemy. Officers noticed that wherever Murphy was placed, German resistance seemed to vanish. Not because Murphy was reckless, but because he understood combat on a level that couldn't be taught. He read terrain like a map. He anticipated enemy movement. He struck first, always. When officers were wounded or killed, Murphy naturally took command. Rank didn't matter, action did. By January 1945, Allied forces were attempting to eliminate the Colmore Pocket, a stubborn German-held area in eastern France. The Germans weren't retreating here. They were defending every inch. Snow fell relentlessly, temperatures dropped below freezing, frostbite was as deadly as bullets. Murphy was now platoon leader. He carried the responsibility of dozens of lives and the emotional weight of knowing that every decision could kill someone he knew personally. During one assault, German troops counterattacked with overwhelming firepower. Murphy ordered his men to fall back, then stayed behind to cover the retreat, alone, again. He exposed himself deliberately, drawing fire to buy his men time. By the time he withdrew, enemy soldiers lay dead across the snow. It wasn't heroism, it was survival. Murphy was wounded repeatedly during the campaign. Shrapnel, bullet grazes, concussion from nearby explosions. Each time he refused evacuation. Medics argued officers ordered him to the rear. Murphy ignored them, because every time he left, someone else took his place. And that someone else often didn't come back. Sleep became rare, nightmares became constant, but Murphy kept going. On January 26, 1945, Murphy's company was positioned near a village of the Holswehr, on the edge of a forest. Snow blanketed the ground, visibility was poor, everything was quiet, too quiet. German forces and infantry-supported tanks were preparing a counterattack. Murphy sensed it. When the attack came, it came fast. German tanks rolled forward, machine guns ripping into American positions. Murphy ordered his men to pull back into the woods. They hesitated. He shouted at them to run. Reluctantly, they obeyed. Murphy stayed behind, again. What happened next would become one of the most unbelievable acts of individual combat in military history. The next hour would decide everything. Against tanks, against infantry, against impossible odds. Audie Murphy was about to climb onto a burning vehicle and fight an entire enemy force alone. January 26, 1945, near Holswehr, France. The snow-covered forest was quiet, until it wasn't. German artillery crashed into American positions without warning. Machine gun fire followed seconds later. Then came the tanks. Gray shapes emerged through the trees, advancing steadily, their engines growling low and heavy. Audie Murphy's company was outgunned, badly. Murphy immediately recognized the situation. If his men stayed, they would be overrun. He shouted the order to withdraw. Some hesitated. Murphy didn't. He personally directed each squad back towards the forest, making sure every man moved and then turned back towards the enemy, alone. Just ahead of Murphy sat an M10 tank destroyer. It had already been hit. Flames tickled from the hull. The crew was gone, dead or wounded. Most soldiers would have avoided it. Murphy climbed onto it, exposed, silhouetted, standing on a burning vehicle in open snow. Mounted on the M10 was a 50 caliber machine gun. Murphy grabbed it. German infantry began advancing through the trees using tanks as cover. Murphy opened fire. The 50 caliber roared to life, ripping through the silence. German soldiers fell instantly. The enemy returned fire, bullets snapping past Murphy's head, breaking metal, tearing into the tank. He didn't move. For nearly an hour, Murphy held that position, alone. He fired until the barrel overheated, then fired more. When German infantry tried to flank him, he adjusted fire and cut them down. When tanks advanced too close, Murphy did something unthinkable. He picked up the radio and called an artillery strike on his own position. Explosions tore through the snow around him. Shrapnel ripped into the tank destroyer. Murphy stayed. His leg was wounded, his uniform torn. Smoke burned his lungs. Still he fired. The Germans believed they were facing a much larger force. They weren't. They were facing one man who refused to retreat. Eventually, the German attack stalled, then faltered, then collapsed. Bodies lay scattered across the snow. Survivors withdrew into the forest. Only then did Murphy climb down from the burning vehicle. He limped back to his men, somehow still alive. Still standing, still in command. Moments later, he led a counterattack, retaking the lost ground. Not after resting, not after medical aid, immediately. When the fighting ended, Murphy finally allowed himself to be treated. His wounds were serious. He should have been evacuated. Instead, he stayed with his unit. Word of what happened spread quickly. Officers struggled to believe it. So did witnesses. But the evidence was everywhere, in the snow, in the destroyed equipment, in the bodies left behind. What Murphy had done defied standard military logic. It was impossible, yet it happened. For his actions that day, Audie Murphy was awarded the Medal of Honor. He was 19 years old, barely old enough to vote, not old enough to legally drink, already one of the deadliest soldiers in American history. The war would soon end, the medals would pile up, the headlines would celebrate a hero. But Audie Murphy didn't leave the battlefield when the guns fell silent. The war followed him home. The battle near Holtzwehr was over. The snow was still stained dark, the air still smelled of smoke and burned metal. But for Audie Murphy, there was no moment of victory, no celebration, no relief, only exhaustion. Murphy sat quietly after the fighting ended, staring at the ruined field where an entire German assault had collapsed. Men spoke to him, he barely heard them. What he had done hadn't sunk in yet. Because when you survive something that should have killed you, your mind doesn't celebrate, it just goes numb. In the days that followed the battle, Murphy was ordered to the rear for treatment. Doctors examined his wounds. A serious leg injury, shrapnel damage, and extreme fatigue. They told him he was done, that he'd earned his rest. Murphy didn't argue. For the first time in years, he didn't resist leaving the front line. But the rest he wanted didn't come. Without gunfire to focus on, without orders to follow, the silence was worse. Murphy replayed the fight again and again, every burst of fire, every body falling. Every second he stood exposed on that burning vehicle. He had survived, others hadn't. The truth weighed heavier than any medal ever could. The story of that battle moved fast, too fast. Officers whispered about it, soldiers exaggerated it, commanders tried to verify it. Murphy overheard fragments of his own legend forming in real time. One man held them all. He fought tanks alone. They thought he was an entire unit. Murphy hated it, because legends erased details. And details was where the dead lived. He didn't see heroism when he looked back, he saw faces. Murphy was informed that he would receive the Medal of Honor, not later, not back home, but before the war had even ended. He accepted the news without emotion. To him, the war wasn't over. Men were still dying every day. Germany was still fighting. Celebrating now felt wrong. When the citation was read aloud, Murphy stood stiff and silent. He didn't smile, he didn't feel proud, he felt distant, as if the man being described wasn't him at all. Despite his injuries, Murphy remained with his unit in limited capacity. He trained replacements, advised officers, and prepared younger soldiers for what awaited them. Many of those men would soon see combat. Some wouldn't survive it. Murphy never lied to them. He didn't glorify war, he told the truth. The fear never disappears. That courage isn't the absence of terror. That survival is never guaranteed. They listened because he had nothing to prove. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany, Murphy knew his time in Europe was coming to an end. Not because he wanted to leave, but because there was nothing left for him to give. He was physically wounded, mentally drained, emotionally hollowed out. The war had taken everything it could. When orders came finally sending him home, Murphy felt no excitement, only uncertainty. The battlefield had been brutal, but it had made sense. Home wouldn't. When Audie Murphy left Europe, the war stayed behind, but it didn't let him go. It followed him across the ocean and into the rest of his life. By the time the war in Europe ended in May 1945, Audie Murphy was no longer just a soldier, he was a symbol. At just 20 years old, Murphy had become the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II, awarded the Medal of Honor, holder of multiple Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, and Purple Hearts. When he returned to the United States, crowds gathered. Newspapers ran his photo, politicians shook his hand, parades were held in his honor. A young, clean-cut hero who embodied courage, sacrifice, and victory. But behind the medals and the smiles, Murphy was falling apart. At night, Audie Murphy didn't dream, he relived. The snow, the gunfire, and the screams. He woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing, hands shaking. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. Sometimes he woke up swinging, convinced he was under attack. Other times he didn't sleep at all. The war hadn't ended for him, it had just moved inside of his head. At the time, there was no real name for what Murphy was experiencing. No diagnosis, no treatment plan. What we now call PTSD was simply called battle fatigue, and the heroes weren't supposed to talk about it. Murphy's fame caught the attention of Hollywood. Producers saw him as the perfect war hero, real, authentic, and already loved by the public. Despite having no acting experience, Murphy was offered multiple film roles. At first, he resisted, then he accepted. Hollywood gave him something the battlefield never did: structure, routine, and distance. Murphy went on to star in more than 40 films, mostly westerns and war movies. In one of the strangest twists of fate, he even starred in a film adaptation of his own biography, playing himself, recreating battles he barely survived, reliving trauma for an audience that applauded. Murphy rarely spoke publicly about the mental toll of combat, but privately, the cracks were impossible to hide. He struggled with insomnia, depression, dependency on sleeping pills, and sudden bursts of rage. At one point, Murphy locked himself into a motel for days, attempting to quit medication cold turkey. He nearly died. Eventually, Murphy did something almost unheard of for a war hero in his era. He spoke out. Murphy began advocating for better treatment of combat veterans, calling attention to the psychological damage caused by war. He argued that bravery didn't end when the fighting stopped. Sometimes the hardest battle came after. Despite his fame, Murphy lived modestly. He didn't see himself as special. He didn't believe the myth. To him, the men who didn't come home were the real heroes. The ones whose names weren't printed, the one without medals. Murphy carried their memory with him for the rest of his life. Audie Murphy survived the deadliest war in human history, but fate had one final, cruel twist awaiting for him. And in death, his legend would grow even larger than it had in life. By the late 1960s, Audie Murphy had faded from the spotlight. He still acted occasionally, he still attended veteran events, but the fame that once followed him everywhere had softened into something quieter, something more personal. Murphy spent much of his later life writing poetry, riding horses, and avoiding crowds. Despite everything he had done, he never sought praise. He remained uncomfortable with the word hero. To Murphy, heroism belonged to the men who didn't make it home. the ones who stayed behind in snow covered forests and shallow graves, in memories that never faded. On the morning of May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy boarded a small private plane in Virginia. The weather was poor, fog hung low over the mountains. The plane never reached its destination. It crashed into Brush Mountain, killing everyone on board. Audie Murphy was 45 years old. After surviving artillery barrages, machine gun fire, tanks, and near constant combat, it was a quiet mountain that finally took him. Audie Murphy was buried at the Arlington National Cemetery. By his own request, his grave marker was simple: no gold leaf, no excessive decoration, just his name, his rank, and his service. Visitors still stop there today. Some leave medals, some leave flowers, some simply stand in silence. Because even among heroes, Audie Murphy's story stands apart. Audie Murphy matters because his story breaks the myth of war. He wasn't a giant, he wasn't invincible, he wasn't fearless. He was small, he was scared, and he was human. And yet, when it mattered most, he stood his ground. Murphy reminds us that courage isn't about strength or size. It's about choosing to act when everything inside you tells you to run. He also reminds us of something harder, that surviving war doesn't mean escaping it, that bravery doesn't end when the shooting stops, and that heroes often carry the heaviest burdens long after the world stops watching. On a frozen day in January 1945, a teenage soldier climbed onto a burning tank destroyer. He stood alone against an army, not because he wanted glory, but because someone had to stay. Audie Murphy did, and because of that choice, he became a hero.